Hey, I'm Zeb.
And I'm Maddie.
And welcome to the We Don't Know Yet podcast. Whilst both Maddie and I are healthcare practitioners, we understand that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to healthcare. Should you require any medical attention, please seek out your local healthcare practitioner.
Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are we going?
I'm good. It's a beautiful morning.
This morning we are joined by Luke Murfitt, the owner of Evolve Human Performance. He is a strength and conditioning coach, friend of the show. Welcome, Luke.
Thank you for having me on. I've been very excited to, once I saw it was getting started on Instagram, I was excited to get around it.
I've been so excited to have you on. It's obviously Zeb and I both pretty well in different scenes and capacities. But yeah, no, I was excited to have you on and interview you.
Yeah, well, I was more so excited because I feel like I know you and I knew of you a lot, and just the general, talk of the territory being involved in a little bit of running in the last couple of years. I was like, yeah, I know him, but I hadn't actually put face to name yet. So this is exciting.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, like in today's world, you've just got Instagram, and we see each other, we hear each other, we chat on the phone as well. Yeah, you just kind of feel like you've already met, and then especially in the Shire, you'll probably see each other out. It's just how it happens. And then if you've got
that is the Shire. That's the epitome of the Shire.
It's crazy,
honestly.
Yeah.
No, it's good though. It's good, and bit of an exciting topic for us to break down today, because I think it is something we're so involved in, or since me moving up here, it's something that I've been really interested in getting into a little bit. But Mads, you've done a lot in the running space, especially recently.
I would definitely not say a lot, but the past couple of years.
Yeah. And then to have someone like yourself on as well, who sees a lot of runners, manages a lot of kind of runners in the Shire as well, is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I feel like you run into anybody in the Shire and you're like, oh, who's your coach? And like, oh, Luke is. I'm like, oh, okay.
Even when I followed you on Instagram, though, it's kind of like, click on your story and, you see Maddie run past at one of the events. You're like, oh, I know. Run past, you're like, oh, hello.
Well, it's funny because a lot of the people in the kind of running community start off in the running community, and then, even kind of if they're strength centric kind of or a strength coach, they'll be a runner first and then kind of move into the gym because of all the evidence and kind of everything kind of coming out. But I come from the point of view where I was kind of strength first and then kind of fell into endurance sports. It kind of just gives me a little bit of a different perspective. But yeah, that's literally kind of how it happened. Was I was training when I was doing a lot of general population clients, training one guy, and he was getting into running and then eventually triathlon.
Yeah, wow.
And I just kind of firstly, I'm notorious for following a passion in my personal life, and then my business kind of heavily influencing my business, 100%.
Yeah.
And then we kind of found how much progress he was making. It's kind of hard to, it's a hard one to measure, but what we were doing in the gym kind of seemed to be having a positive correlation to his running. Awesome. And we kind of, both of us kind of were this is a massive hole in the market. There's not a lot of people doing this. Plus I started to get into it, getting a bit of a passion for it. And I was just this is working.
It's amazing.
And then you just kind of start getting results with people. And then, as we just kind of said, the Shire, people talk to one another, and you can kind of just start to, kind of grow a business, and people start to, talk about your work with you.
Yep.
And that's just kind of, it's really organically just kind of kicked off.
It's amazing.
And just quickly run us through where you actually are in the Shire, because the Shire is a big place, as we know. But
it is, yeah.
What are the perimeters of the Shire? Where does it start and end? Is it Sylvania?
I don't think so. Isn't the Shire the whole thing?
Isn't it Sylvania to the Berg or Waterfall?
You got your two bridges.
So I'm going down a rabbit hole here. I'm
pretty
curious.
sure
it's a big detour from Someone get the maps out.
So divert.
I think Helensburgh might be in the Shire. It's a big call.
No, because everyone puts shit on Helensburgh. Sorry, any Bergians listening to this.
The Berg, as we learned a couple of weeks ago with Chapo, referencing the Berg.
Okay. The Berg came up last week too.
Yeah.
Right. Crazy.
We were interviewing Chapo, and he's like, "I've got to go down to the Berg," and Zeb didn't know what the Berg was. And it was a whole thing.
I was like, I don't know.
Maybe it's not in the Shire. We don't know.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe
that's
not.
how that happened.
Sorry, we digress. I just went down a rabbit hole. And I was like, where is?
You've just opened up a pretty exciting new little space.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about kind of what you're doing there.
Yeah, so I've been a personal trainer for, I think, coming up on 7 years, and I've predominantly just kind of worked out of other people's facilities, subcontracting.
Yeah.
And yeah, it kind of just naturally, like I was working alongside a guy and we were like, let's go out and open up a facility with a little bit more space. And, you know, just like every other gym in the show, I've always been based down in Tarrant Point.
Yeah.
But if you kind of like go down the rabbit hole, or not really even down the rabbit hole, but if you just look at the types of gyms in this show, like they're very similar gyms to one another.
Big cardio.
So although there are a lot of gyms, there's still a massive hole in the market for just training athletic populations and training them well.
Yep.
So that's what we were going to do. And he ended up getting a contract and moving to Japan. So that kind of just led me. But it's also very hard to find a space. So it probably took 7 or 8 months. And now I've found a space which is just subletting out of someone else's factory.
Yeah, nice.
In Tarrant Point. So I've set up about a 80, 90 square facility there.
Yep. Awesome.
And still doing kind of like the main thing that I enjoy, which is kind of working like in the nitty gritty of like the 1-on-1s and the 2-on-1s and those types of things.
Yeah, nice.
Because there's always that like part of you that because you have the space, you kind of should fall into more of a semi-private or a group training model.
Yep.
But yeah, I've kind of decided against that, got a few subcontractors, and yeah, it's at the very least the move has kind of like really improved my service because I've been able to have a little bit more space to get some cable machines and
Nice.
and those types of things, whereas the facilities that I have been subbing out of have been more kind of like the CrossFit style,
Yep.
where you've just kind of got a squat rack and a barbell and some dumbbells, which
Yeah.
are fantastic. But especially when you're working with runners and people that are generally have some injuries and whatnot, some isolation work is pretty valuable too. So
Yeah, awesome. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't that be like your point of difference then? The fact that you are that commercially gym space more so now, but you don't necessarily do the group format?
yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
100%. And then yeah, just kind of niching down further from general population to more endurance athletes and whatnot.
Yep.
But it's because I've got the facility there. As I said, I'm kind of working one-on-one predominantly, and I've got a physio and an EP now starting. But it's been really refreshing to see physios and EPs wanting to work in gyms.
Yeah, that's
So
cool.
that's been the main point of difference for them is like they've got a little area where they've got a bed if they want to do some treatment, but also they've got a gym with a lot of equipment.
Go through the exercises.
Because in my opinion, a lot of that is training towards kind of strength first and kind of less manual therapy and whatnot. So that was really cool to see too.
Yeah, awesome.
And it's I think it's really interesting because in terms of performance gyms, it's something that I think the Shire probably lacks a lot of in terms of, you know, we were just talking off air a minute ago about all those bigger gyms like Athletes Authority or Core Advantage or Six Principle, some of those big like S&C driven gyms where they have coaches on the floor working with athletes one-on-one, and you know the athletes can kind of come in as they wish and run through tailored programs. Something that you don't really see too much of here, like locally, which is nice because just like Maddie said before, a little bit of a niche for you to kind of really step into.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a handful, but the way that other group models and gym models are growing, the athletic performance kind of side of things is, you know, as I said, I've been kind of personal training for 7 years, and there's not many that have popped up that are just purely athletic performance based. So, you know, the amount of gyms down in Tarrant Point or just in the Shire is crazy. But yeah, it's absurd that there's not, you know, because a lot of like strength and kind of strength conditioning is based around kind of like improving athletic qualities, whether you're general pop or whether you're actually an athlete. It's kind of very similar stuff, and they should be kind of trained in a very similar way.
Yeah.
But you do start to get gyms that are running strength conditioning classes, and then the whole kind of strength conditioning word and everything's just kind of been a little bit diluted.
Yeah,
so
it's a bit blurred, isn't it?
people don't really know anymore. And it's kind of just like
what
that's
does
why
an SEC coach do?
it's like if people ask me now, I'm a personal trainer. Like
Yeah,
I think you care less and less about those labels and whatnot
Yeah.
when you know that what you're doing is, you know,
Well, the results speak for
100%.
themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the person that's looking for whatever kind of you are offering as well will find you no matter what you're kind of called. Hey?
yeah,
Yeah.
and they don't care.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
I used to be when I was for years, like I didn't really want to be a personal trainer. Like I feel like there's a lot of negative connotations with just personal trainers in general. But now I'm just like, yeah, I don't really care.
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So most recent big event, would that have been the Sydney Mara for you and your clients?
Yeah, definitely the bigger one.
Yep.
For sure. That was the biggest. I think I had around 10 doing the marathon.
Yeah,
And
amazing.
then 17, I think, across the 10K, half and Mara. So Sydney was big.
Yeah, great.
But like people have been pumping Sydney up for like the last year.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, I mean, the conditions were crazy for that time of year.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was definitely one of the
33 degrees.
It's just nuts, eh?
My feet are reminding me every day.
Tears
Mate,
in
he's
the
shivering
eyes.
over there. Yeah.
A little bit of post-traumatic stress.
Oh,
Yeah.
seriously. Oh.
Yeah, so that was a really good event. And but yeah, at the moment I probably work with majority of runners, but a fair few triathletes in there as well.
Yeah,
So
amazing.
the most notable of that coming up would be Husky, which is in a couple of weeks.
Yes,
yeah,
exciting.
forgot Husky was coming up
Got
soon.
a few
hey?
mates doing that.
It's a
which is exciting.
torturous track when you're
Oh.
running the half marathon. You're doing the straight along the Esplanade. No tree cover if it's a hot day. Everyone's
Outback.
Yeah.
Head noise central that.
Out and back. You don't realise how far 5K is, but on an out and back, it's like, oh my god.
You do the first one, then you're like, oh gosh, I've got to go do another one now.
Yeah.
And it's like trying to psych yourself up.
Yeah.
We'd like to take a break from today's episode to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Drip Digital. They manage all of our audio and video editing as well as our social media marketing. Without them, the We Don't Know Yet podcast wouldn't be possible. So thank you again.
And so what? Before we really dive into too much stuff, I just want to make reference to the fad that is running, because I feel like
Everyone's in their running era.
like you make big reference to the fact that since last year's Sydney Mara, it's been a really big thing. Kind of everyone's pumping up this. Everyone was pumping up this year's Sydney Marathon as well.
Yeah.
What have you said? Because I just feel like since COVID hit, running is like the thing that you could do during COVID, and it's the thing you can still do after COVID.
Yeah.
So I feel like so many people are just starting to get stuck into it. It's such an
Yeah.
easy, cost-effective way of just getting out and moving.
True.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't know, like fad is an interesting term. Like it's probably past that point. Like,
Yeah, true.
Like
It's just a
COVID was
thing.
almost 4 years ago, and
True.
like people are still coming down, and how long you been running, and I just started in COVID, and that used to just be like last year or a couple of years ago, but that's like 4 years. It's like, oh, you're a runner now. Yeah.
It's crazy
You've got a
to
label.
think. Yeah.
Nice. But yeah, so I reckon, and it's only from my perspective, and as we were saying before, it's growing. So you would, I think, naturally see a bit of a decline where people aren't locked in their house and they don't have to just run as a way of kind of getting out and exercising. But I think that has, just started a whole bunch of momentum. And I think running and triathlon kind of together, like even now as I take up cycling, like even if I look back at, and I'm training teenagers that are 18 that have been cycling for years, it's like, that's never a sport, like that was never a sport that I would have even considered when I was in high school. It's like you've got teenagers coming through, and triathlon is their main kind of sport.
Pretty cool.
And it is one of those things where if you like kind of in the community, you kind of realize actually how big the community is.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a big part of it, isn't it? It's kind of like when you're going through, you don't see it, but you don't know if you don't see it because you're just not involved in it yet. And then the
100%.
moment you're involved in it, you're kind of like, whoa.
Oh my God.
Whoa.
Yeah. Like who would, like even riding back last weekend, and I reckon I'd rode past probably 100 cyclists and like 5 groups of like 20, 30 people.
Yeah, wow.
And I think, I've seen, and I kind of share it now, almost like a joke on my profile, but runners that do get injured that start to kind of cross train a little bit, and it's a slippery slope, and then they're doing their first triathlon, and it just enables them to kind of train. It is a double-edged sword because it enables them to train so much more often, with the swimming and riding being so much less impact.
Yeah.
That it starts to kind of take over things a little bit. I think naturally with something like running, you've got limiting factors there where it's like, okay, I could run, some of the like higher level or more frequent runners are running kind of 4, 5, 6 times a week, but most people are probably around the 3 or 4 mark.
Yeah.
Otherwise you are really increasing that risk of injury. So I think it's something that actually naturally puts a limiter on But when you incorporate a bike or a swim or something, it's a little bit like, oh, I could do this
Yeah,
for
yeah.
3 hours every day.
Maintain the fitness, but lighter on the knees.
100%, yeah.
And that becomes the gateway.
Yeah.
For sure. It does.
Oh, unreal. And so to strip it back for everyone, I think we were hoping to kind of take it from the perspective of, you know, if you're into running, you're trying to get into a little bit of running rhythm, or you've kind of tried running but you haven't been able to find your rhythm a little bit. We were going to kind of strip it back today and just have a really good look at
Back to basics.
yeah, what kind of, you know, you need to be doing to start thinking about getting out and hitting the road. Because a lot of people, like we were saying before, just think it's like, yep, I'm going to go and get my shoes, throw them on, get out there for 20 Ks, I'll be good.
Yeah.
When a lot of the time that's not the case.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
But, you know, how have you kind of introduced, and this is a really broad question, so we might bring it in a little bit from here, but have you seen a lot of people come across from like team sports or, you know, even general pop who have, you know,
Just gone to the gym or
just
something.
gone to the gym and they're trying to, you know, get a little bit of exercise or movement outside of the gym as well. How do you kind of introduce them, if you've worked with them, to a little bit of running? Or let's just start there, I reckon.
Yeah, so I mean, like I don't want to just turn this into like just be conservative and run easy, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like it's true, but it's also boring.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like there's so many other factors, and I also be pretty careful with what I encourage and prescribe, because I don't like there to be too many prerequisites to undertake any kind of physical activity.
Yep.
So it's kind of like strength training, like even from my bias, will definitely help. But it's not a prerequisite to actually start to run.
Yeah.
So that's my kind of perspective. And that's like a lot of things. Some things are more of a necessity, like, you know, nailing nutrition and recovery and those types of things. But there's definitely a hierarchy of things that you want to take care of. But as I said, there's no prerequisites as well. So I would encourage, and I do, to get some kind of running program or structure.
Yep.
That's a massive one, and kind of speaks for itself, but also kind of not really. I don't think people know like how important that actually is.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes I do see that where people don't have a lot of structure and they're trying to incorporate strength training to decrease their risk of injury, but they're probably putting all their pennies into something that might have, you know, an ROI of 20%, whereas if they did just take care of their load and manage things properly and follow a program, that might more, you know, it could more be like 50 or 60% or even greater. So like that's number one, but that doesn't have to be like a rigid structure. It doesn't have to be like a go straight to a running coach and get a rigid structure. I like to encourage just like to educate and to actually learn. Like if you genuinely, and you'll find that, well, I find, and this was the big difference between like training a lot of gen population for fat loss and you're trying to motivate people. Like often endurance athletes
They are
do.
motivated.
Yeah, you know, the challenge is actually putting the brakes on a little bit and getting them to do less. So getting some kind of structure, but also just learning why it's important to adhere to that structure and why things are important. So why is, you know, not spiking load and jumping from 20Ks to 40K in 7 days a good idea. And some people won't really care and they'll have to kind of learn the hard way, and that's common. But you do, even then, you want to find kind of rehab professionals and physios that are going to kind of educate and kind of teach them along that way, not like here's some kind of calf raise, isometrics, don't run for this week and then see how it feels next. It's kind of like
learned nothing.
Yeah, you kind of like that's what I like to do. So yeah, I mean, at the very kind of basic level, most people's issues would kind of like at the very least be less significant if they just followed some kind of run structure or just learn a little bit about progressing running.
Yeah.
And I feel like starting to run and having a little bit of that structure, that's where like I see that running club or run club like community aspect really kind of become a big part of someone's Why?
Oh, definitely.
You know, because they're getting out, they're integrating with a new community, making new friends.
Confidence boosting.
Yeah, there might be, you know, other reasons for them actually getting involved in the running in the first place, or other drivers that actually help them stick to a little bit of that structure. But do you see that a lot with like some of the people that you work with in terms of, you know, you find some people who try and get out there on their own and stick to a structure don't really, you know, they can't get the longevity or hit the distance. Whereas like the people who, you know, rock up, run with a run club 2-3 times a week, they kind of tend to be the people that turn the legs over a little bit more frequently.
Thinking about it, like it is, I think it's a fine line. I think something like endurance sports or running specifically can be a very lonely sport. And especially if you kind of lead with a program, it's not very often that you're going to find someone that's at a very similar level and you guys can do, you know, your sessions together. Most of the time you're on different kind of structures. So even if you're doing a track session or whatever it might be, you might meet in the one location. But it can be hard to kind of, for the stars to align to train with people. And I think that's the same kind of double-edged sword with the run club too, where it does have that natural competitiveness to it. And
oh yeah.
And that, yeah, like every run kind of turns into a pretty hard effort or a tempo run. And that's not really how you kind of want to be progressing things. Or even if you kind of, longevity is an interesting term, because I would probably find the opposite. I would find that people that are obviously depending the run club and who's running it and kind of the whole structure and who else is involved and all that kind of stuff. So not putting everyone in the same basket. But people that do a lot of their sessions that are relatively unprogrammed, but just with a run club kind of structure, I would say that they're probably, what I have seen, their injury rates are higher because they're not taking care of that kind of first and foremost thing being load.
I distinctly remember you messaging me when I was like doing my marathon prep with you, and you were like, are you going to do a marathon at 4-minute 30Ks? I was like, well, no. You're like, why are you training like that?
Yeah.
Running with Maddie is sometimes a little bit torturous, because it used to just feel like the pace used to crank up, and it was kind of one of those things where she just like starts talking, completely loses track of the pace, and she's just like off to the races. Like we're getting faster as we're talking more.
I know, because it starts hurting and you're just trying to take your mind off it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Whereas
because when I used to run, like I was running with people, and then like I was drinking like the whole kind of nasal breathing, all that kind of Kool-Aid. So I was like, I'm not talking throughout this run.
Yeah,
so it's like, you can run with me if you want, but it's not good company.
I'm not talking to you.
Yeah.
You know exactly when I have head noise too, because I'll pop my earphones in and it's like, she's having a bad
she
day.
flips a switch and then it's gone.
Yeah, right.
Don't talk to me. Headphones in, just like go for it.
Yeah, no, I do see what you mean though, because it is interesting, isn't it? There's a real fine line with it. You got to make sure you, especially when you're starting out and you're trying to build progressively.
Yeah.
It kind of tends to be like, oh my gosh, everyone's so much faster than me. I got to run as fast as I can to try and keep up with the group.
Yeah.
And then the polar opposite of that is, like you said, with the elite runners, or the runners that are kind of a little bit more conditioned. They're at the front of the pack and they're like, oh mate's right behind me. I got to make sure I keep at least one stride length ahead.
Yeah. So it's just, like all good things, like it's just finding the balance within that. Because I think they're awesome for that kind of community aspect and that kind of social aspect.
Oh, for sure.
But it's just like if you're going kind of once or twice a week, you just have to make sure your other runs throughout the week are probably an easier intensity, or you're making sure you're taking care of those recovery aspects like nutrition and sleep and those types of things.
Yeah.
And it just depends who you are. Because some people just defy all of that and they'll just do 4 tempo runs a week and they'll seemingly not get injured and just run
and
unbelievable. So there's so many factors that kind of go into your ability to tolerate load and volume and intensity. So it's a hard one, but for the majority, especially if you're just getting into running, it's just trying to find that line.
Yeah. I'm going to take a slight tangent again here, but it is
we go.
related. It is related.
Helensburgh.
Helensburgh. What are the
I went
perimeters
for
of
a run
that?
in Helensburgh one time. And
Now, I want to hear your thoughts on like the whole zone 2 training, because I know that's really hot at the moment. I guess in the context of something like running or training for a long distance thing, is it beneficial?
Yeah, for sure. For building like endurance, absolutely. It's just, depending on the things that you need as a runner. Like if you're just getting into running,
Yep.
absolutely, because I think it allows, so you can kind of look at it from that like aerobic kind of engine building adaptation, and then like your physical adaptation of like your tissues and their capacity to handle load and tolerate and all those types of things.
Yep.
So while you're kind of building that aerobic base with kind of some zone 2 work, you're probably running at a slower pace. So you're allowing kind of the tissues to adapt a little slower as well, because they are slow to adapt. Just depends who
just
you
to,
are.
just to
Yeah.
strip it back even further for people as well. So like zones, meaning that like
Oh, yeah.
obviously we're breaking
Should have
down heart
prefaced with
rates.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
And
and everyone's got a different capacity when they run. Some people train zone 2 and they're running bloody quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not really.
Well, that's what their Strava says anyway.
Yeah, like
I look at it a little bit
Chapo.
suspiciously. Yeah,
Chapo does
Chapo's
like 4 minute Ks
must
and
be
his heart
changing
rate's like
something.
150. I'm like, what are you doing?
They got to study that man.
But yeah, and then other people obviously they're kind of running at a lot slower of a pace and still kind of hitting that similar
Yeah.
heart rate. Right?
So I mean, if we're like, as we are just talking kind of beginners and whatnot, like most people that kind of probably haven't done a lot of running, probably like running fitness in its own is like, it's kind of separate from other fitness, like just aerobic adaptations. I think, like for example, like if I was just riding 6 hours a week and I hadn't run for a year, and then I went for a run. Kind of talking from this, getting specific now. We're talking from experience. It's like then I went for a run, hypothetically, and I was running at what used to be an easy intensity, but I was at threshold. It's kind of like, whoa, I'm a lot fitter aerobically, but running it seems to be just its own animal.
Yeah.
So I think, don't quote me, but I think it's like 60 to 70% of max heart rate zone 2.
Okay.
For
That
most
sounds
people,
about right.
I think it's around like 120 to 130, which is a lot lower than people think. Kind of
Yeah.
Zone 2's kind of just got synonymous with like aerobic training, which is then kind of like people thinking anywhere below 150.
Oh my gosh.
But it's a lot lower than you think, because otherwise you're kind of like in this weird, and the whole like benefit to zone 2 is the fact that you can get positive aerobic adaptations without accumulating as much fatigue.
Right. Gotcha.
So that's the key, because
Preserve future training.
exactly right. So you can accumulate more throughout the week, and then you can kind of progress more that way.
Yeah.
So it's obviously very popular in like triathlon and those types of things where you're juggling 3 different modalities in a lot of hours.
Yeah.
But that's the main kind of reason. So if you're only doing kind of two runs a week, there's probably an argument for both of those being intervals and more tempo-based runs, because you're allowing enough recovery throughout the rest of the week to recover from those sessions.
Yeah.
But like it really depends who you are. So if I was someone that hadn't been running a lot and I hadn't done a lot of sport when I was younger that was like aerobic dominant, and I just don't, like you'll find those people that just naturally have a great engine and people that just don't.
Defy it all.
So like for people that don't, they're going to get a lot of benefit from running at really easy intensities, but people that already have a relatively low resting heart rate and, you know, are pretty aerobically fit, you might just be able to get away with kind of 2 tempo runs a week. But like I think that's a really interesting factor that I've been thinking a little bit more of over the last kind of year or so, is like all of these factors that lead to, as I kind of alluded to before, lead to someone's ability to tolerate kind of running load essentially, and intensity and kind of volume. So if you even like talking about like someone like Chapo, like I don't know him that well or his history, but like even I think he was like high level touch footballer or something. So what I've kind of found is like a lot of people that, or even a couple of people that I trained that were like a soccer background, or these sports that require a lot of running throughout the week.
Yeah.
And high speed running, but also some lower intensity stuff. And a lot of the stuff that I've also looked into is like how influential those years are when you're developing on your tendons' ability to tolerate to load, and that's through like endurance sports. But then I think it's also applicable, like I think even in the context, Zeb might be able to talk a little bit about like even like your springiness and your ability to dunk and jump and those types of things. Like a lot of that is built, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're younger.
Yeah,
and if you just start getting into basketball now when you're 25, I think you've just got a really small ceiling in comparison to someone that has been doing it it makes sense for 15 years.
Yeah, and it's that age-old discussion of like time, right? Like time is such a big factor when it comes to building resilience and strength, and like in terms of the body's resilience, things that it's done forever and a day, especially from those younger ages where you are developing and your body's kind of growing. You're just a lot more susceptible to developing some of that resilience, and if you're trying to pick something up when you're 30s and 40s, and that's not to say that you can't do it. Like I think it just means that the body's actual resilience, is you probably need to put a lot more work into
100%, yeah.
build that,
and you got to be more
resilience
patient.
up.
Yeah. But on the counter, like I work with a couple of people that are kind of middle age and they don't have a lot of history of running, and they're doing crazy ultra events. So like,
That's great.
I don't know what goes on there.
It's always outliers.
There's always outliers.
Yeah.
No, and then so when a lot of people start out with some of their running to go on the back of that, I always think people get really focused on your Stravas, and
it's like Facebook.
It is. It's like the Facebook for runners. That's what someone described it to me as one time. But like in general, when people are starting out, like, what are some of the key things that you look that they kind of invest in a little bit? Because it is one of those sports where, like any other sport, I grew up playing basketball, and the thing used to be, you used to go to Foot Locker, you used to walk in, have a look at what the best new basketball shoes that they had on sale. You used to buy like 2 pairs because you just used to churn through them. But it's the similar kind of thing with running in terms of, and it's not cheap. They're like $400 running shoes crazy, a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But like making sure that you have a good pair of shoes. Or are you an Apple or Garmin guy?
I'm a Garmin guy.
I see an Apple Watch on the wrist there.
That's a Garmin. Yeah, Garmin.
But also just having something for you as a runner to kind of like keep track of some stuff can be nice too.
For sure. Yeah. I think again, like there's not a lot of prerequisites or necessities in terms of equipment that you actually need. Like, because even in terms of like a heart rate monitor, like a lot of like it's just kind of determining the intensity. So you could use like an RPE scale, 1 to 10. You could use heart rate zones. There are kind of power metrics that you can use as well with like pods and stuff that you can chuck on your feet. But it doesn't need to be that complex, especially starting out. It could just be like how much you're breathing and if you're able to hold a conversation, if you're not able to hold a conversation, if you can kind of like hold half a conversation. Like you could literally zone your kind of intensities that way. Yeah, like a decent pair of shoes. Like I'm probably not the guy to speak to there because I think even that.
It's a bit. The only reason I bring up shoes is because it does. I find it very controversial sometimes. You
Honestly,
see that there's a scale, and you see the extreme like max cushion, and you see the extreme barefoot, and that's a big argument in the space now. From a sense of,
it's so individualized though.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You need to find what works for you, and like some people sit in the mid category. Like I tried running in the vapor flies, and I feel like I'm on stilts.
I was just gonna say I was gonna talk like not so kind words about a certain pair of shoes that I have, but I was like, I shouldn't name brands, but instead goes away.
Don't get me wrong, I love the vapor flies. I feel like I fly along in them.
Yeah.
But the first time I ever ran,
it's an odd feeling.
Yeah, it felt weird, and as a runner, I was like, I don't know if I like that feeling yet. Like, you got to really kind of get used to some of that stuff.
I've bought like the creme de la creme of shoes before and hated them. Like, you try them on, you're like, this is shit.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's so individualized.
Yeah. But like, as you said, like, I think, probably 3 or 4 years ago, it was all minimal. Like, I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I was having the Vivo Barefoots. I was doing it. Not really running in them because that was still just like a bit of a...
You gotta work your way up to that.
Interesting one, yeah. And then, you're right. Now these days, it's hard to get a pair of shoes that doesn't have a massive cushion in the heel. So I think it's just kind of finding, unfortunately,
colours.
What works.
Do they actually have like ruling on like?
I think they do, don't they?
So I swear, a New Balance shoe came out a while ago, and they were saying that like all the marathon runners couldn't wear it because they weren't allowed to actually.
I actually feel like I've caught wind of this.
Yeah,
me too. I don't have the details, but there was like, especially with the carbon plating and all that kind of stuff, because obviously technology is just going to keep advancing, so they just keep getting lighter and the forward propulsion and
it's crazy. The biomechanics, so interesting.
So I suppose like basic necessities for anybody listening that is keen on getting started in running, what would you recommend?
So I'd definitely like even carrying a phone or something to track the run, or a watch. The watches aren't like super affordable, I don't think. Like the Garmin or Apple, like expensive. So just use your phone.
Yep.
Like anything, like don't invest too much up front. Just find out if you actually enjoy the sport. But yeah, I like a heart rate monitor, a chest strap. Like there's definitely a difference between a chest and a wrist.
Like the
watch
MyZones or
heart
something.
rate. Yeah, MyZone or Garmin or any of those. So there's a decent discrepancy between the wrist and the chest. So if you're gonna use heart rate as a variable to gauge intensity, definitely get a chest strap.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I feel like my Garmin always says my heart rate is disgustingly high, but I don't feel like it is.
Right.
Like it'll say it's like maxing 200 and I'm like, I feel like I was okay on that run. Like wasn't having a heart attack.
You are pushing.
Yeah, it's so weird.
I think it's been proven it's like 10 to 20 beats different or something.
Yeah, well, okay.
Which
That's
is a fair
comforting.
bit. And then especially if you're kind of moving around, I think it's worse.
Yeah, right. So phone, pair of shoes.
Yeah, phone, pair of shoes. You could obviously go down to your local kind of running shop.
The running company.
The running company plug. Kirui. I had to say that.
Shout out to Todd.
They'll help you out to find a pair of shoes that feels comfortable and then just kind of rip in. Like I think that something that's overlooked, kind of a tangent, kind of not, is like running technique and running kind of biomechanics. But I think that's kind of like obviously very individual too. And what I have found, if you are someone that played quite a lot of running sports growing up, like you might be safer than someone that hasn't run in 20 years. And then, they might have these biomechanical kind of limitations to kind of hitting certain positions. But there is also the argument that the body just kind of adapts to whatever kind of tolerance you place on it. So that's also a rabbit hole. But I think there's got to be a little bit of value in actually, especially initially, just learning some basic checkpoints and principles that you should be hitting in terms of run technique.
Yep.
Like some simple stuff, it could be cadence or whatever, because it's a lot easier to kind of like learn the new habits than undo the old ones and then relearn.
Yeah, when I first started out, I don't know where I heard it, but I thought you had to like go for the lowest cadence possible. So when I did like the Gold Coast half a few years ago, I was like striding.
Oh, no.
I was like, this just feels so uncomfortable. And I was chatting with Chapo and he's like, no, you're an idiot. It's the other way around. I was like,
oh no. And then I think just to further on from some of that stuff now, let's just quickly dive into the relationship, because I feel like we've touched a little bit on predisposition to some injuries and things like that. But I think it'd be cool to talk about a little bit of a general overview as to what can predispose someone to something like that, because like you said, it's hard to control people, whether that be sometimes trying to slow them down, sometimes trying to bring their Ks in so that they're not pushing it too much, or the opposite of that, which is trying to get them some consistency so they're actually building a little bit of an adaptation. But what do you find a lot of the time? What's the first thing that you start to toy around with a little bit in terms of trying to preserve someone's kind of, I suppose everyone's different, so it's not really an easy
try to reduce that injury risk. So I mean, like, boring, but first and foremost, it's got to be just running load. So like, we could probably dive into that a little bit, and that is kind of like the running load as a kind of general term would be like, could be just the kilometers per week, the amount of intense kilometers or speed work within those kilometers, or minutes or hours or however you want to kind of work off. I think that's the main thing that you want to, and it could be trial and error initially, and you want to just start conservative and kind of build. And there's a couple of things, like if you're taking care of it yourself and you don't really want to outsource it, like there are some basic stuff that you can kind of adhere to that will just get you in the rough ballpark of sensible progression, like the 10% rule on both volume and intensity. So not increasing your weekly mileage by more than 10%. And that's, in my opinion, pretty conservative one. And same with kind of speed work. So if you did 10 kilometers of total running volume in 1 week and 2 kilometers of that was some high speed work, if the following week you wanted to progress that by 10% speed work, that only puts you, another couple hundred meters.
Yep.
So if you look at it like that, it's like, that is not a lot at all.
No.
So I think, definitely more conservative. But they're just general ones that, as I said, can kind of, if you are, It's a hard one too because I don't want people to hyper focus on injury risk because it is something that we want to encourage people to do.
Hyperfixation on
100% because depending on who you are, like if you do have that type of personality and kind of susceptibility to overthink things and be a little bit more anxious and those types of stuff, like you will literally just start to talk yourself into certain injuries,
into pain. So
you do want to like, as much as there is like a high injury rate with this particular sport, for some people it's about them getting out of their head and just running,
giving
and
it a go.
not overthinking it, not overthinking the shoes, not overthinking the cadence, not overthinking all of these little kind of minute things that they read in an article online. For some people, it's kind of actually listening to their body a little bit more and stop ignoring all these yellow flags that could potentially lead to something greater. So it's all like, it's very individual, and you just, on both sides of the spectrum, it's too much of a good thing. If you're always hyperfixated on reducing injury risk, you're never really going to do anything remarkable. And I mean, that's not the goal for a lot of people. I guess it's just to enjoy it, but you're probably not going to enjoy it either. So it's very dependent on that kind of athlete, their personality, their history, and those types of things. But first and foremost is just getting your head around what we're talking about when we say running load, and then how to actually progress that is probably the biggest thing, and probably the biggest thing that will determine your injury risk as it relates to running.
Yeah, I like it.
Which is kind of boring, but like, even on that, like, you can go further down the rabbit hole because we're just talking kind of volume and intensity, and like intensity being kind of speed work and volume just being kilometers per week. But we're also, like, you can think about kind of localized tissue stress too. So you might just keep the mileage the exact same, 10 kilometers and 2 kilometers of speed work, say, in 1 week, and then the week after, that 10 kilometers, 8 kilometers might be on the trails, or might be a hillier route, might be a pair of different shoes, might be a different running technique that you're trying out, might be a different,
the actual stress on the body.
100% might be a different temperature, nutrition might have been different, recovery might have been different. So the further down that kind of load management rabbit hole, in hindsight, it's easy to kind of like point out sometimes, I've got this specific overuse or tendinopathy. My running mileage went from here to here, or I changed shoes, or I was trying to really increase my forefoot strike in comparison to a heel strike. And then, like, at the localized level, that's going to put more stress kind of through the calf and Achilles region if you're going closer to that kind of forefoot, where if you were running 40 kilometers with a heel strike and then now you're doing 40 kilometers with a forefoot strike, you're putting more pressure, more stress through one particular region. So surface level 40 kilometers was the same on both weeks, but you actually changed a lot of factors.
But I don't reckon it is boring, because I feel like all too often people focus on those like 1%ers. They focus on the saunas and the recovery boots and the supplements and things like that, and like, well, yes, to an extent they're important, like you need to come back to that basic point.
I mean, that's a whole nother topic, but that's also kind of something that is becoming so popular.
Oh, it's such a wank.
Which is extremely interesting. But yeah, like, even as an example to that, like yesterday, because I like, as I said, when I was having my minimal barefoot shoes, like I had an ice bath in my backyard like 4 years ago, and I was doing one every day type thing. And I hadn't done one in a couple of years, and then yesterday I just bought some ice and kind of just jumped in.
It was a day for it.
It was a beautiful day for it. But I'd been dealing not like super low key, just like tendon, if I was kind of pushing down power on the pedals, like very early on in a ride, and it would just kind of clear up. But as soon as I got out of the ice bath, like the tendon was just like, I could just feel it. And I hadn't felt it the ride before, rode 3 hours the day before, didn't feel it at all through the whole weekend. And then as soon as I got out, the tendon was just like not happy about things. So it's like, if we just paint everything with the same brush of just like recovery, because I think people are kind of starting to get more awareness around the fact that the body's natural inflammatory response is actually a positive thing that's going to improve recovery. So if we jump in an ice bath after every hard session and really blunt,
shunt.
Really blunt.
Shunt.
Really blunt.
Slow,
That's really blunt.
Like if you really slow that inflammatory process or that tissue
sometimes
repairing.
Sometimes not a good thing. So
Hinder?
Hinder could have
Yeah,
worked.
Hinder's a
blunt.
Rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I've seen some people that will come in and be like, "Yeah, ice bath's my thing." Like post session,
Ugh.
I love it. My body's great, and I'm like, okay, well, it's really interesting now because we're going another layer on from that and thinking the psychology behind it. Like if someone's belief system is that heavily
This is
influenced by
fantastic.
that,
Yeah.
it might actually be benefiting them a little bit. Like they might actually, obviously we can look at it from a physiological and like a structural perspective, but if they get out every time and tell me, "Oh, I feel tip top," I'm
Yeah.
going to be like, right, well, we're just going to roll with this for a little bit until we, see how we go.
Yeah.
But if they, same thing. If you get out of the ice bath and you're feeling horrible, it's like, well,
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that again. After the
100%.
session.
Yeah.
But it is really interesting, and the ice bath's an interesting one to talk about because I think, there's so much coming out about hot cold therapy at the minute, and I think whether you're having an ice bath straight after a session or you have an ice bath, 5 hours after a session, or there's just so many different layers to that whole narrative. So it's a really interesting one to break down. But I think you're right. It's such a subjective and an individualized kind of
Oh, for sure.
process as well, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I guess that kind of, sorry, you go.
No, you go.
I was going to
You
say that leads us down to like your more bread and butter area, which is the whole strength training in the context of running.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, I suppose, what would be the basic sort of level that you would recommend for somebody wanting to get into running?
So important.
Yeah.
Strength training.
Yeah.
Yeah, at a basic level.
Yeah.
So, so I think it is, as you kind of just said, it's simplifying things. I think often, like without treating every question as like it's individualized. It's individualized. It's depending on all these factors.
Depends.
Like just basically taking joints through ranges of motion that they kind of should be taken through. Same thing, like managing your gym load just as you would with your running load. Obviously, you don't probably have to be as cautious with that. But yeah, you want to just, it's really simple, but it's just breaking down how the body moves and then kind of breaking that into, so I think the biggest trap that people will fall down is the fact that they try and be really specific to running. Too specific to a point where they're trying to mimic what they actually do on the track or in a race or running in general.
Yep.
So you get better at running by running. In the gym, everything's going to be relatively general in nature, and we're breaking things apart and we're building kind of higher with tissues with higher capacity and those types of things, but we're doing it in a way that allows us to progress exercises over time.
Yep.
Whereas if we looked at everything through this lens of like it has to relate to the position that I'm in when I'm running,
Yep.
you're really going to miss out on a whole bunch of low-hanging fruit. So I even got a message this morning. Who knows if this particular client will listen to the podcast. But he had like an injury and he's just been strength training for couldn't run. Essentially, we've kind of been working with a physio. And he hasn't been running for a while now, a few months, and he's just kind of getting back to maybe incorporating some return to run in. And then he said, like, I've built enough strength, so I'm ready to go into like more running specific things.
Right.
And I was like, bro, the whole program's been running specific. Like everything that we've been doing is just like relatively, like it's always going to be generally nature in the gym.
Yeah.
So whether that's some squats or some RDLs or some deadlifts or a little bit of rotation for the core or some calf raises,
It's all related.
it's all exactly right, and it's all relatively general, and that's the biggest thing. So like a lot of where I differ, and like, if I wanted to say that I'm down the niche of strength training for runners or strength training for triathletes or whatever it is, like the main points in that is definitely some exercise selection. Some are probably more advantageous to others in my opinion, or sometimes I have a different lens that I can look through things through that other people don't have, because I've worked with a lot of people that might have similar issues or worked with physios and those types of stuff. And that's where it can kind of differ slightly.
Yeah.
But at the core, it's just very similar things. So where I kind of niche and work with that specific population is more so kind of managing their weekly load in terms of their strength training, managing their volume, like kind of if you just approached it with like a minimal effective dose mentality, like you didn't do like didn't overkill in the gym.
Yeah.
You just lifted some weights, left a couple of reps in reserve. You did, 5 or 6 exercises that were challenging you. You did that twice a week. You're probably safe. And you kind of did it at a time that was like, I like to go like after a run session, and then have the following day pretty cruisy.
Yeah.
So as long as you kind of scheduled it roughly so it didn't kind of interfere too much with the running sessions.
Yeah.
As I said, if you'd taken things to an intensity that was challenging, you chose basic exercises, you're probably safe.
Yeah, I was surprised, like in a positive way, and I definitely attribute it to not having as many or not any injuries when I was training for the Mara by training with you with the strength. But when I first got the first set of exercises, I was like, oh, this is like quite light, but I was impressed. I don't know if I'm not articulating that very well.
I feel like this comes from a very like traditional, like when you go to the gym, you've got to feel like you're in the absolute
flogging
hurt locker
yourself.
after.
Yeah.
And I think this is almost a little bit of a bigger misconception, is that you have all these athletes and runners that come through that have just done like a session, they feel absolutely wiped from it. Yeah. And they get in the gym and they're like, oh, this is actually really easy. Are you sure? Like the
strength training was the favorite part of my training, week. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people just come from like that kind of HIIT group training where you're just thrashing yourself. So.
Yeah. And you walk out and you're like, oh, can't feel myself. But you're actually meant to walk out feeling like, you've been worked a little bit, but like you could go out and do something still.
Yeah.
I was going to say.
You don't want to feel wiped for 4 days because that's going to absolutely hinder your training program all over the show.
Oh, don't get me wrong. Like the exercise was still challenging, but it wasn't that to that point exactly as you said, Zeb, where I couldn't walk for like the rest of the week.
Yeah.
And that's the main kind of like discussion against strength training for endurance sports is the fact that the soreness thing. I don't think soreness is the end of the world personally myself. Yeah. A lot of the time you can just train through it. It's not really going to do too much, but they get worried because a lot of athletes think that it is interfering. Sometimes it might be, don't get me wrong. But it's just kind of managing. So you'll do, but they kind of get stuck in a cycle where they'll kind of do one session, go balls to the wall, wake up really sore for 3 days, and then be like, oh, I can't do that because it interfered with this session too much. Yeah. And they'll do that once a month. And because they're building no adaptation with the gym, so if you just consistently hit the gym, even if it was a hard training session, if you just did it for a fortnight, like you would know if you did the first session and you woke up really sore the next day, you did the exact same session a week later, there'd probably be no soreness.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Like it's just a certain element of consistency.
And I think this is also a really big rabbit hole that a lot of people fall into. And like I'm talking general pop, or like if you've had an athletic like background or history doing running, like people always think, right, I'm gonna go to the gym, trial it out, see how I feel. They go there, they do their strength training, feel horrible after for the next 4 days because I just overdid it completely. And then they're like, you know what? I'm running. I'm like, my sport is running. It's not weightlifting or in the gym. So you know what? My training from now on is just going to be running.
Yeah.
Why am I injured?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is a really big trap because it is that, they walk in my door and they're like, so, I started running a couple of months ago. I was feeling pretty good. Now I'm like, my calves are like shot, my Achilles hurts, got plantar fasciitis. And I'm like, so talk me through like your general week. They're like, so Monday running, Tuesday running, Wednesday running, Thursday running, and Friday running, and then I have the weekend off. And I'm like, well, are you going to the gym? They're like, nah, I don't need the gym. I'm running.
Yeah.
I think it's just such a big. It's something that you can really pigeonhole, like in a sense that if you are a runner, you're kind of like, oh, I don't need the gym because it's like whatever. I don't need to lift weights.
It's only to your detriment,
it's not sport specific.
Yeah.
But the gym and being strong and having those tissues really nice and resilient so that you can actually progressively overload your running is so important.
Yeah, and I unfortunately think a lot of that stems down from endurance coaches, and I think that's where it kind of has to start kind of changing. And I think there are certain sports where you will still find those kind of older heads that aren't as open-minded to lifting weights, and you'll find it kind of in every sport. I think some of more common than others, but endurance sports is one. Like I've got athletes now that would be kind of like great athletes and kind of like I don't even know how you'd rate them, but probably better than like doing more than the average
general
kind
pop.
of general pop. Yeah. and they just don't even tell their endurance coach that they're doing strength work.
Really? Just out of like fear?
Well, just pretty much. just out of the fact that they've kind of bought into it and they have seen the benefit, but I think they know their coach and they don't want to have the discussion. Like,
that's tricky.
So
it is, and it is really hard because this
Mm.
is where the mismatch on training load comes in, you know, and all of a sudden we have to regress somewhere across a week. You can't just be flat out the entire week, and if there's that real misalignment in terms of expectations from a coach and a S&C, and then all of a sudden, you know, this is where little cracks start to pop up, isn't it? You know, you start to see people getting overtrained or undertrained because they're trying to please one or the other, and it just becomes really difficult.
You need that multidisciplinary.
Yeah. Well, you want everyone on the same page. Like, or at the very least, you want your respective coaches to kind of have a general idea as to these other kind of forms of training or recovery, and that's like where I kind of put myself. I've like gone down the rabbit hole of these different kind of areas, and I don't specifically call myself a running coach, or when I was doing nutrition, it wasn't just sports nutrition or anything along those lines, because I understand that respective roles or a physio or anything like that. Like, because you get to a point where you would rather refer out to these respective individuals that are probably more experienced in that area and probably well equipped to kind of get your client a more efficient result. So in my head, it's kind of like I've fallen into a lot of running programming now because a lot of the athletes that I was getting coming to me for strength training programming weren't following a structure and didn't know kind of where to start, essentially. So I think it's just, so if an athlete comes to me and they have another coach, like I've got enough of an idea to kind of know what's roughly going on in their run scheduling. If they might have a dietitian or whatever, like I've got enough of an idea when it comes to nutrition to know certain things that they should be focusing on. Obviously, strength training is more of my forte. If they're seeing a physio, like if in doubt, I'll get in contact with that physio and kind of, and I'm not afraid to do that. And that's why I think now I've got like this really generalist kind of like idea of what each kind of modality and its certain role and the coach's certain role.
Yes.
But I don't think that is a common perspective to have when it comes to working with these athletes. So what I mean is like those older head kind of endurance coaches or physios or those types of people where they're not kind of across what we might, and they don't need to be in the intricacies of what we're doing in the gym, but they should have a rough idea as to why it should fit in a schedule, how it's going to fit in the schedule, and then if in doubt, kind of get in contact with me. But that doesn't, in theory, awesome, but in practice, very different. So you kind of end up in this point where it's like, okay, well, you know, I don't really agree with what they've done there, or they might feel the exact same way. But if you don't have that open discussion and communication, it can be very hard.
And it's really hard as well because sometimes it's such a big ego thing, right? Like, it's horrible, but it is something that really, in an ideal world, it's just snuffed out pretty quick, and there's no ego game, and it's just open lines of communication. You can flick on, like, everyone's technologically advanced in this day and age, I think, if you're working in the healthcare space. And if not, you almost need to get on that level so that you can communicate really effectively with other kind of practitioners or people managing patients or clients that you're seeing, because otherwise it's just, once that communication's cut and there's none of that kind of back and forth, all of a sudden it's not you guys that are like the S&C coach or the coach or the physio or osteo that are kind of, or even the dietitian that are suffering. It's the client who's actually then all of a sudden going
getting
backwards.
all of these mixed messages from all these different people.
So it's a really important one to kind of snuff out. And like, I think it'd be so nice to snuff out globally just this big ego thing where it's like, that guy's telling you the wrong information. It's like, well, how about you open the line of communication, have a conversation with them. And all of a sudden you might actually work out that you're actually talking about the same thing. You're just saying it differently.
100%. But first and foremost, the client or the whoever you're kind of working with, they should be the priority. And their results are like, and that's I've always been results driven.
Yeah.
And it's not around, like, I don't know, there's something where people be like, oh, you know, like I genuinely feel so much better, like because of this kind of strength training.
Yeah.
And in my head, it's like, I don't know, I think some people, like, I don't get like a fulfillment kind of like out of that so much. It's more of like, I love to kind of put my system and thought process to the sword. So it's like, even now, I just got a run coach on board, and he was just really open and was just like, I don't believe that in strength training for runners. And I was like, he's like realistically, short time frame, I was like, I'm going to sign up for a month. And he was like, I'm going to see if there's any benefit.
Wow.
And I was like,
There you go.
I was like, I love the open line
Let's go,
communication.
let's go.
Yeah.
Maybe too open, but I was like,
At
yeah,
least
let's
he's
do
giving
it.
a go though.
Yeah.
That's great.
I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, cool.
I mean,
Change
it's
his mind.
cool. It's cool for,
Exactly,
for
yeah.
different industries to trial that stuff anyway. You
Yeah.
know, like I think it's so important for everyone to. You can't knock it until you at least try it, right? We all have our own perspectives. We all have our own opinions on how things are run and how we would prescribe things or how we would direct people. But you know, if there's an alternate way, it's not that it's a wrong way. It's just a way that you haven't heard before. And until you actually get out there and give it a crack, or at least go and experience it, you can't be like, that doesn't work.
100%.
It's
Yeah.
like you don't actually get the right to say that until you go out, give it a crack.
Don't knock it till you
And
try
then,
it.
yeah, and then if it's not for you, that's fine. Like, but at least you've gone out there and had a look at what it's actually all
Yeah,
about.
I know.
Just giving it a go.
Yeah,
There's
which
not
is cool.
there's not many things that I would give to people that I haven't done
Yeah.
before.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Huge.
I feel like the last question, just in the interest of time, and I think you did answer it earlier in today's potty, is the whole like pace versus weekly kilometers thing. Like what I'm going to guess, or based on what you were talking about before, you're more towards the side of kilometers?
Both.
Both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what I mean by I don't want to just speak about easy running and don't do it all the time. Like threshold and running fast definitely has its place in a program.
Yep.
But yeah, I think from my experience, like speed work and tempo type effort, speed work on its own is probably one of the ones that kind of undoes more people than probably volume, I think.
Yeah.
But both are important for sure.
It's
But
like
it's just
variability across a training load, right?
it's just being able to sensibly, but it's knowing that like they're not. You can kind of sacrifice a little bit of volume for intensity, as I kind of said, but they're not kind of directly. You can't just directly exchange them either. So they both do different things. And they both should be part of a well-rounded plan. But if in doubt, it's probably the tempo, speed stuff that people aren't ready for and that they should be more conservative with.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for jumping on today's potty.
Absolutely.
I suppose for our listeners wanting to learn a little bit more about you and what you do, where can they find you?
Instagram's probably the best at Evolve Human Performance. I went on a bit of a YouTube run for a bit. When I had surgery, I just had a bit of time. So there's a couple of YouTube videos on there.
Very nice.
But as we were kind of talking about pre-potty, it's like the video editing and everything is just
so
it's
time
fun.
consuming.
It's like a whole nother job.
Shout out to
Yeah.
Drip Digital. Yeah. No, it's another beast, isn't it? You know?
Yeah. So Instagram's probably the best. And yeah, when I'm not as busy, I kind of put out some content. So.
I like the stuff you put out, even the like talking videos that you do. They're really good.
Thank you. Yeah, Instagram's cool. It's kind of like really heading into that kind of video reel
Yeah,
space. Yeah.
it is really good.
We're heading digital.
I know.
Medicine, healthcare, it's all heading digital.
Whether you like it or not.
Awesome stuff.
Cool.
Thanks for coming on, buddy.
No worries, guys. Thank you for
you.
having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast.
Be the first to know when the next episode drops by hitting subscribe on wherever you catch your podcasts.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at we don't know yet.pod.
See ya.